March 3, 1943, 25,000 feet above the English Channel. The cold is so sharp it bites through the heated flight suit. The hum of the Allison engine reverberates through the Mustang's slender frame as Lieutenant James Goodson of the U.S. 4th Fighter Group peers through the frost-specked canopy. Below him, waves crash like shards of glass against the coast of France. Then, radio chatter breaks the static. "Bandits! 10 o'clock high." The Mustang's bank hard left. Silver wings flash against a gray sky. But within seconds, it's clear the P-51 as Allison engine is straining. German Messerschmitt Bf 109s dive in from above, their Daimler-Benz engines roaring effortlessly in the thin air. Goodson pushes the throttle, but the Mustang's power fades at altitude. The 109 streaks past, cannons flashing. He feels the plane shudder, instruments flicker. He curses under his breath. She can't breathe up here. The Allison engine wasn't built for high-altitude war, not for the skies over Europe where the Luftwaffe ruled the upper air. The P-51 had beauty, grace, but no lungs for the fight. It's in that frustration, thousands of feet above the channel, that the story of the P-51 Mustang's transformation truly begins. The Mustang had been born not in America's great factories, but out of Britain's desperation. In April 1940, as the Luftwaffe battered Europe, the British Purchasing Commission approached North American aviation with an urgent request: build them a new fighter fast. James H. Dutch Kindleberger, president of NAA, promised one in just 120 days. The result was the NA-73X prototype, sleek, fast at low altitude, and fitted with the Allison V1710 engine. It was everything the British wanted on paper, except where it mattered most: above 15,000 feet. Test pilots reported it could outturn a Spitfire below the clouds but gasped for air above them. Britain needed altitude performance, a fighter that could meet the Luftwaffe's bombers head-on. Instead, they got a machine that excelled in ground attack and reconnaissance, not interception. The P-51, as it was designated by the U.S. Army Air Forces, was good but not great. Not YET.BY. Late 1942, the U.S. 8th Air Force had begun daylight bombing raids deep into occupied Europe. From bases across southern England, B-17 flying fortresses droned eastward toward industrial Germany. But their escorts, the P-47 Thunderbolt and P-38 Lightning, couldn't follow them all the way. The result was carnage. Raids over Schweinfurt, Regensburg, and Bremen bled the bomber groups white. Dozens of fortresses didn't come home. Crews nicknamed their missions suicide runs. Commanders begged for an escort fighter that could fly the full round trip over 1,200 miles at high altitude with range, speed, and teeth. But no such fighter existed, until a quiet moment in April 1942, when a British engineer named Ronald Harker walked into a hangar at the Rolls-Royce testing facility in Hucknall, Nottinghamshire, and saw a Mustang for the first time. Harker, a test pilot and engineer, had flown nearly every aircraft in the RAF's arsenal. The moment he saw the American-built Mustang, he was impressed by its aerodynamic lines, the laminar flow wing, the smooth fuselage, the forward visibility. But he also knew the flaw: the Allison engine. In a short flight that spring, Harker climbed through the clouds and felt the power drop off sharply above 12,000 feet. When he landed, he said to the ground crew, almost casually, "This aircraft, with a Merlin 61, would be a world beater. That single observation would change the air war over Europe." The Rolls-Royce Merlin 61, then powering the Spitfire Mk9, was a masterpiece, a two-stage, two-speed supercharged engine that maintained power at altitude. It could push fighters to 400 miles per hour at 30,000 feet. Where air combat now lived. Harker's suggestion reached the right ears: Rolls-Royce chief test pilot Ronald Shepard, and soon after, Air Marshal Sir Wilfrid Freeman. Freeman saw the potential instantly. Permission was granted. Mate the Mustang to the Merlin. Rolls-Royce engineers began the conversion quietly, under the project name Mustang MKX. They took 4 airframes and installed the Merlin 61. The first test flight came in October 1942. The results were staggering. The new hybrid climbed faster than a Spitfire, reached 433 miles per hour, and retained stability even at 30,000 feet. The transformation was total. The Mustang had become something entirely new. It wasn't just fast. It was efficient. The redesigned engine cowling, improved radiator scoop, and fuel efficiency meant it could now escort bombers deep into Germany and come home. Word spread fast. RAF pilots who had dismissed the Mustang as a low-altitude scout were now begging for squadrons of the new version. The Americans took notice. North American Aviation, working with Packard to produce Merlins under license in the U.S., began rolling out the P-51B and P-51C in early 1943. By the time these new Mustangs arrived in England, the tide of the air war was ready to turn. Winter, 1943. The skies over Europe were bloodied. American bomber crews still flew without full escort, suffering 20 to 30% losses on long-range raids. But when the first Merlin-powered P-51BS of the 354th Fighter Group arrived at Boxted Airfield, everything changed. The Mustangs soared alongside the bombers and then beyond them. Their range, speed, and high-altitude performance shocked the Luftwaffe. German pilots, once confident at altitude, now found silver-winged predators sweeping down from above. By December, bomber losses dropped. Luftwaffe kills rose. And for the first time, Allied pilots were escorting their formations all the way to Berlin and back. The fighter that had once gasped for air was now the hunter of the heavens. The P-51 Mustang, reborn through a single engineer's insight, became more than a fighter. It became a symbol of transatlantic collaboration. British engineering, American innovation, and industrial might fused into a weapon that broke the Luftwaffe's back. By mid-1944, Allied air dominance was absolute. When the bombers came, the Mustangs came with them. Diving from the sun, guns blazing, their engines singing the sound of victory. Ronald Harker's quiet remark had become prophecy. And the Mustang, once dismissed as average, now ruled the skies as the deadliest fighter of World War II. February 20th, 1944, 22,000 feet above Leipzig, Germany. The horizon is burning with tracer fire. Below, hundreds of B-17 flying fortresses crawl eastward through freezing air, their wings shimmering in the morning sun. To their flanks, a new kind of escort soars, the P-51B Mustang, its Merlin engine humming with predatory calm. From the lead ship, Lieutenant Colonel Donald Blakesley of the 4th Fighter Group glances at his fuel gauge. Still half a tank. He smiles. The Mustangs can go the distance. Stay with the bombers. No one breaks off unless they're on fire. He radios. The order echoes through the sky. For the first time, the Americans can fight their way to Germany and back. Operation Argument, later called Big Week, began that February, a coordinated bombing assault on the German aircraft industry. The Luftwaffe had rebuilt after devastating losses in 1943, but its factories at Leipzig, Regensburg, and Augsburg were still vulnerable. Before the Mustang, such raids were suicide. B-17s and B-24s, once past the Rhine, were easy prey for Jägerschwader 26, 27, and 300 elite German fighter wings flying Messerschmitt Bf-109s and Focke-Wulf 190s. But on this day, the tables turned. The Mustangs roared in first, climbing high above the bomber stream. At 30,000 feet, they caught the sun. German radar picked them up, but too late. Achtung! English Jaeger. Ganz neue Typen. Attention! English fighters. Entirely new type. The Luftwaffe pilots dove in, expecting sluggish American escorts. Instead, they met the P-51. The dogfights that followed were unlike anything the Germans had seen. Captain James H. Howard, flying solo after his group scattered, fought off 30 German fighters to defend a formation of B-17s. For that single act, he would later receive the Medal of Honor by the end of Big Week. The Luftwaffe had lost over 500 fighters and 100 irreplaceable pilots. The air over Germany was no longer safe, not even for Germans. Spring 1944, the Luftwaffe, once the terror of Europe, was bleeding to death in its own skies. At bases like Leisten, Debden, and Boxted, Mustang pilots sharpened their craft. They called themselves the Little Friends, the bomber's constant guardians. But now, with the Luftwaffe on the defensive, their orders changed. Take the fight to the enemy. Instead of tight escort formations, Mustang squadrons were given freedom to roam ahead of the bombers, to hunt. They strafed airfields at Jüterbog, Werneuchen, and Rechlin. They dove on trains, trucks, and fuel depots. In a single mission, Blakesley's men destroyed over 100 aircraft on the ground. The German ace Adolf Galland, once confident of air superiority, later admitted, "When the Mustangs appeared over Berlin, we knew the war was lost." Even the vaunted Me-262 jet, Germany's last technological hope, couldn't appear safely. The Mustangs ambushed them during takeoff and landing. The hunter had become prey. Behind every Mustang kill was a man with a story. Major George Preddy, flying Cripes a Mighty, became America's top-scoring Mustang ace with 26.83 aerial victories. Chuck Yeager, a young West Virginian, shot down 5 enemy fighters in a single day, an ace-in-a-day record, before later breaking the sound barrier after the war. Robin Olds, later a Vietnam War hero, began his legend in a P-51 called Scat-2. They were ordinary men in extraordinary machines. The Merlin's whine became the anthem of their courage. But behind their heroics was the relentless machinery of Allied production. Factories in California, Texas, and Michigan churned out P-51DS with bubble canopies, 6.50 caliber guns, and external drop tanks for even greater range. WWII mid-1944, the Mustang was no longer a novelty, it was a storm. March 4, 1944, Berlin, Germany. For the first time, American bombers reached the heart of the Reich, escorted all the way by P-51 Mustangs. Atop Tempelhof airfield, German flak gunners watched in disbelief as contrails stretched from horizon to horizon. Verdammt, es sind überall. Damn, they're everywhere. Above the Capitol, Major Robert Bob Hoover of the 352nd Fighter Group spotted a formation of FW-190s diving for the bombers. He rolled inverted, dropped behind them, and opened fire. 2 went down before they even saw him. The radio crackled with laughter. For men who had once watched their bomber friends die unprotected, the emotion was overwhelming. For the German defenders, it was despair. The Reich's last defense, the Luftwaffe, was being dismantled piece by piece by the aircraft born from Ronald Harker's single suggestion. WWII D-Day, June 6, 1944, the Allies controlled the skies. The Luftwaffe, crippled by losses, could only send sporadic raids over Normandy. Every German pilot knew, if the Mustangs appeared, escape was nearly impossible. That summer, Allied air superiority was absolute. Bombers struck railways, refineries, and communications. Panzer divisions moving toward Normandy were torn apart from above. In less than a year, the balance of the entire European war had shifted, not because of a new bomb or strategy, but because of a single aircraft that could go the distance. The Mustang had become the spearpoint of Allied air power, a symbol of speed, endurance, and vengeance. The skies over Europe no longer belonged to Germany. They belonged to the men in the silver planes with the blue noses, and the engineer who dared to say, "Let's put a Merlin in it." Autumn 1944. The gray morning mist clings to the English countryside at Leiston Airfield, Suffolk. Rows of P-51DS shimmer under the dew, their silver skins reflecting the pale dawn light. Ground crews move with silent efficiency, checking oil lines, loading ammunition, fastening drop tanks from the control tower. The low rumble of hundreds of Merlin engines grows into a thunder that shakes the earth. Blue flight, you're cleared for takeoff. Moments later, the Mustangs rise in formation. Sleek, deadly, and unstoppable, their silhouettes slicing through the clouds toward occupied Europe. Below, a mechanic wipes the grease from his hands and watches them vanish into the gray. "They'll be over Berlin before noon," he mutters. And he's right. By the fall of 1944, the Luftwaffe was fighting for survival. Allied intelligence estimates showed the Germans losing nearly 1,000 aircraft a month, not only to combat but to destruction on the ground. Mustang pilots hunted the enemy with precision and fury. They roamed deep behind enemy lines, striking airfields, trains, fuel depots. Anything that moved. T. Merseburg, Brunswick, and Dusseldorf, their .50 caliber guns stitched death across hangars and runways. German ground crews had to camouflage their aircraft under trees, hiding them like frightened ghosts in the forests. But it was hopeless. The Americans called it fighter sweep. Offensive patrols designed not to protect bombers, but to eliminate opposition entirely. And the Mustangs, with their range and endurance, were perfectly built for the WWII winter. The Luftwaffe had been reduced to a shadow of its former self. The elite Jagdgeschwader units, JG-1, JG-26, JG-54, were down to half strength. Experienced pilots were dead. Replacements were barely trained. Fuel shortages meant fewer training hours. When the Mustangs appeared, most German fighters never stood a chance. Still, Hitler's Reich tried one last gamble: the Messerschmitt Me-262, the world's first operational jet fighter. With speeds exceeding 500 miles per hour, it could outfly any propeller-driven aircraft in the sky. If Germany could field them in numbers, it might turn the tide, at least in the air. But the Mustang was there, waiting. Intelligence reports warned Allied commanders that the Me-262 was most vulnerable during takeoff and landing. So P-51 squadrons began patrolling near known jet bases: Lechfeld, Augsburg, Munich-Rhein, circling at high altitude until a German jet appeared. Then they pounced. On October 7, 1944, Lieutenant Urban Drew of the 361st Fighter Group shot down two Me-262s as they approached the runway at Akmar. His wingman reported, "They never even saw us. He dropped on them like a hawk." That became the new pattern. The Mustang turned the Reich's miracle weapon into another casualty. Even Adolf Galland, now flying the Me-262 himself, later admitted, "We had the better aircraft, but they had the better situation." The Mustangs were everywhere. On January 1, 1945, in a desperate final attempt, the Luftwaffe launched Operation Bodenplatte, a massive New Year's Day strike against Allied airfields in Western Europe. Hundreds of German fighters swept low over Belgium and the Netherlands, hoping to destroy the Allied air forces on the ground. For a few hours, chaos reigned. But the Allied response was swift. Mustang squadrons scrambled from runways still smoking with debris, engaging the attackers before they could escape. In the ensuing dogfights, German losses were catastrophic, nearly 300 aircraft destroyed in a single day. The Luftwaffe never recovered. From that moment forward, Allied air superiority was absolute. The skies over Germany belonged to the P-51 Mustang. As Allied armies advanced toward the Rhine in early 1945, the Mustangs took on a new role: close air support and interdiction. They struck convoys, bridges, and retreating columns with surgical precision. Pilots flew so low that their propellers threw up dust from the roads below. When the Allies crossed the Rhine at Remagen, Mustangs circled overhead like guardian angels, blasting any German armor that dared approach the bridge. And when Berlin finally fell, Mustang formations still patrolled the sky. Not because they had to, but because nothing in the Luftwaffe could challenge them anymore. Even as victory approached in Europe, the P-51 was already heading east. Modified versions, the P-51H and P-51K, were deployed to the Pacific, escorting B-29 superfortresses on raids against Japan. On those missions, the Mustangs stretched the limits of endurance. Flights of over 1,500 miles from Iwo Jima to Tokyo and back. It was the longest-range single-engine fighter in history. When the Japanese surrender came in August 1945, Mustangs were among the first Allied aircraft to fly over Tokyo Bay. From the skies of Berlin to the clouds above Japan, one aircraft had become a global symbol of Allied dominance. When the war ended, Ronald Harker's quiet suggestion, a passing thought in a hangar 3 years earlier, had altered history. The P-51 Mustang destroyed over 4,950 enemy aircraft in the European theater. It flew more than 200,000 combat sorties, escorted bombers on nearly every major mission, and changed the fate of air combat. But beyond numbers, it changed how nations built machines of war through collaboration, adaptation, and innovation born of desperation. The Mustang wasn't just a fighter. It was proof that brilliance could come from listening, from one man's idea shared across borders, refined through necessity, and perfected through courage. August 1945. Leiston Airfield. The war is over. The ground crew stands silent as the last Mustangs return from patrol, their propellers slowing, the familiar Merlin whine fading into memory. Lieutenant Colonel Blakesley steps down from his cockpit, helmet under his arm. The horizon glows with a late summer sunset. Someone asks what it felt like to fly the Mustang. He looks up, eyes distant. "It felt," he says, "like freedom." The camera pans up, the contrails fading into gold. The sound of the Merlin engine lingers one last time, a whisper of victory echoing across the skies that once belonged to no one, until the Mustang arrived.